There's different ways you can lay out the major arcana so that they kind of form almost like a mandala. In Eastern traditions, mandala meditations are a form of practice, meditational practice, concentration. In Tibet, you'll see a lot of, they're usually circular though, and they have symbols and images of different deities. And in the Western system, tarot is like parallel to the Eastern system of mandala meditation. So this is called the Grand Tarot Tableau. I learned this through the BOTA, Builders of the Adytum. And the interesting thing about this is that of all the books I've read over the years on tarot, I've only seen this arrangement in 2 places. Through Builders of the Adytum, and then this other kind of obscure group, L&L Research, who were the people behind a series of sessions in mediumship that produced several books called The Raw Material, RA, where these people supposedly contacted an entity named Ra, which was a collective social memory complex from the planet Venus, who had throughout humanity's evolution visited Earth at different intervals in time and tried to kind of uplift everybody spiritually. And one of those times was ancient Egypt, and during these mediumistic sessions, the woman who was channeling Ra, the voice of Ra, claimed that tarot was brought to the high priests of Egypt and codified into a system of spiritual development. It's pretty simple, you know. It's just 7 columns and 3 rows, and then you got the 0 up here hanging out, and it's the Fool, and the Fool archetype is kind of the archetype of the soul that is taking a leap off the cliff into thin air to incarnate into matter. And it's, you know, just this joyful, exuberant energy of life that is just hungry for experience, because it is spirit that is trying to evolve. This arrangement of 3 and 7 reminds me of the Gurdjieff work. Gurdjieff was a Greek Armenian mystic who showed up in Russia around the beginning of the Bolshevik Revolution at the court of the Tsar there. At the time, a group of Russian theosophists, among whom the author and journalist Ouspensky was kind of a luminary in, I believe, St. Petersburg at the time. This is like, you know, early 1900s, 19-teens. He had written several articles about traveling to India in search of the miraculous. He was looking for evidence that spiritual realities really do exist, and he came back a little bit disappointed, I think. But he ran into Gurdjieff, who himself, I think he was about 40, he was in his 40s at this time. He had spent his youth traveling all over the world in search of esoteric knowledge, and assembled it into this kind of system that eventually, he didn't call it this himself, but his pupils did, the 4th way. Gurdjieff said there was 2 major fundamental laws that governed human life and the cosmos, and those were the laws of 3 and 7. So here we have 3 and 7 in operation, showing how they kind of come together in this balanced tableau. And I'll show you mathematically how it is balanced. The law of three states that anything that exists, whether a material object, an idea, an emotion, radiant energy, wind, like just everything that coheres into an observable phenomenon, and even an abstract category, can only exist by the interaction of three forces coming together to produce it. And those three forces are an active force, a passive force, and a neutral force. That's the law of three. So here we have three. The neutral force is in the middle, and the active is at the top, and the passive is at the bottom. So that's the law of three: an active, a neutral, and a passive, a positive, a neutral, a negative. The law of seven states that any process that begins at point A, by the time it gets to point B, is going to have passed through 7 identifiable intervals. Musical pitch: if you hit a C on the piano and you keep going, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. By the time you get to that 8, you're going to hit C again, but at a higher doubled octave, or if you're going descending to a lower halved octave. But in between that is going to be 7 distinct intervals of vibration. So that's the law of 7, and you can see it in music like I just described, or you can see it in the color spectrum of white light. There's 7 distinct colors, and Gurdjieff claimed that this is a universal law that can be applied to any kind of process. So like, driving to the liquor store to get a 6-pack of beer is going to have 7 distinct intervals between point A and point B. Here we have these disparate sources like Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, and then we have the builders of the addendum, a tarot mystery school from Los Angeles, California, and then we have the raw material, a group of mediums, practicing. I think it was in Kentucky in the 1980s. They're all kind of come together here in the tarot in this particular arrangement of the major arcana. What the tarot grand tableau, according to the builders of the addendum, symbolizes is spiritual development along those 7 intervals from point A, which would be least spiritually developed, all the way to the end to most spiritually developed. So contemplating this tableau, this mandala of images, a regular practice of it, just 5 minutes a day, laying out the cards, looking at it, soaking it in, letting your subconscious absorb the imagery. It kind of gives you a template, a roadmap for your own spiritual development. You'll start to get flashes of insight. So the first stage is spiritual development here. Up at the top here, you could say the magician is the active force, a power, a potency, a moving, a yang, it's got impetus behind it. This whole top row is kind of like active forces that affect things. And then you have in between the intermediary force, the agency that receives it and kind of carries it through and transfers it down to the passive force that ends up in a result. So this is kind of the chain of energy going through here. So if this is the first stage of spiritual evolution, we start with the self-conscious mind, which takes in reality through the senses. The implements on the table are the components of self-conscious, the tools. You've got the cup, which is kind of your emotional side, your imagination. You got the sword, which is your intellect. You've got the wand, which is your kind of intuitive, spiritual, instinctive, natural sensing nature. And then you have the pentacle, which is your body and your senses and your perception through those senses. So here we have self-consciousness, magician, how you see things, how you interpret reality, the way you look at things, and how sharp you are in observing the world around you and interpreting it. Those interpretations, the way you look at things, get passed down to the magician's female counterpart. You can see her there, the subconscious. And she is in touch with the body. She is the autonomic nervous system. She, whatever the magician sees and whatever he deduces from viewing his environment and using the tools of consciousness, she passes down into the body, and the body accepts it unquestioningly. It just says, all right, you say it's that way, that's the way it is. This is an enormous power. It's a suggestion in the world of hypnosis. But it's also can be dangerous, as we will see, because in this first level of spiritual development, many people are unaware of this relationship between the self-conscious and the subconscious. And typically, what that results in is this state here. Bondage to the senses. The two figures have a chain around their collar, and this kind of grotesque demon-like figure, Baphomet, standing on the black block of material reality. It's holding up a hand saying, this is all there is to see here, folks. It's holding down that torch that the light isn't really illuminating. It's just kind of creating a lot of smoke. And so when the self-consciousness gets it wrong, it makes hasty deductions. It looks at things and has snap judgments. The subconscious accepts those wholeheartedly, unquestioningly, and passes it down into the body. The body then begins to behave exactly as self-conscious has told it to through the medium of the subconscious. And this results in the belief that, what you see is what there is. And it's limiting. It binds you to your animal instincts, to material existence. And this is all fine and good, because it is important to live by the senses. But at a certain stage, it becomes limiting because there is more beyond just the range of sensory perceptions and the deductions that can be made, at least, on the physical level. So this is the first stage, and this is where most people are at in their life. They look around at the world, they take things in, they make judgments, perceptions, and that gets passed down by their subconscious into their body, and they live their life as if all there is this kind of material reality and the consequences of it, the blind forces of fate, the automaticness of nature, Darwinian evolution, survival of the fittest. It's only by a rare, bizarre occurrence of a mutation that anything changes, and then genes are selected for that. Otherwise, everything's very fatal. Everything just is the way it is. And you can see how we get from this point to this point to this point. And this is the first stage of spiritual unfoldment or evolution. Stage 2 would begins with the subconscious. Suddenly you realize you have a subconscious mind that's just this kind of eternal, primal background mind that is innocent and pure, but also in its eternal purity is this sort of like source of all of everything. It's the flowing feminine yin nature of the mind, the other side of the conscious mind, the subconscious. When you begin to become aware of this, that this really is working in the background, and just the power of it and how it's connected to everything else, it's the common denominator that, you know, minerals, plants, animals, humans, and anything above humans are all kind of connected by this background mind, this wavelength of consciousness, this subconsciousness that unites everything. Once you realize that and you start getting in touch with it, you realize that there is an eternal self inside of you, this ancient self, the archetype of the self that has always been, and it's there to guide you. It's just, you know, sometimes you just have these known perceptions of truth without having to think. You just know in your bones about something, or this is that deep inner self that is the same in every person, because it's the spark of divinity that inhabits everybody, and everything comes from one. Therefore, every iteration of this one self is in essence the same. So this is the eternal self inside of you. And once you realize that, you can no longer believe in blind materialism that, you know, it's all Darwinian evolution, it's all dog eat dog, it's just survival of the fittest. That tower of whatever kind of perception you had previously had built up through long years of misperceptions being passed down into the body and chaining you to them and binding you to these beliefs that you'd always taken for granted get blasted, they get knocked over. Suddenly life doesn't make sense. It's like, what? I thought, you know, you took something as a given and suddenly it gets destroyed right in front of you and you're thrown into this state of, I mean, on higher levels, this can be, you know, freeing, because you're like, yay, I no longer have to believe in some weird bullshit that is no longer true for me. But it can be a painful process. And this flash of lightning sometimes, you could say, comes from the hermit's lantern. Something I want to point out before I go on to explain the other levels of spiritual development is point out the harmony of the numbers here. So we have a 1, 8, 15. So if we take these two right here, the two extremes, you know, because this is the extreme top and this is the extreme bottom, we add them together, you get the number 16. 1 plus 15 equals 16. And then half of 16 is 8. So it's as if the golden mean, the average, the middle path of the Buddha, that perfect, narrow average road between two different extremes is visually, laid out between forces of consciousness in this mandala, this tarot tableau. And you can do that with every single one of these cards, no matter what direction you're looking at. So let's try it for this one. So 2 plus 16 is 18. Half of 18 is 9. 3 plus 17 is 20. Half of 20 is 10. Now let's try it this way. 3 plus 15 is 18. Half of 18 is 9. Let's try it this way. 1 plus 17 is 18. Half of 18 is 9. You'll find that you can do this in any direction. Let's do it up with these three here. 1 plus 3 is 4. Half of 4 is 2. Let's see. And the interesting thing, the centralmost card here, 11, Justice, the balance, the perfect balancer, is right here in the middle, smack dab in the middle of this tarot tableau. So let's take these two extremes. There's the extreme upper left corner of the tableau from your perspective. And here is the extreme lower right corner of the tableau. Added together, they make 22. Smack dab in the middle, you have 11, which is exactly half of 22. So the masters of wisdom that composed tarot arranged it so they could be laid out in this very deceptively simple seeming pattern as a harmonic mandala that you can kind of see the laws of the cosmos and the universe and laws of consciousness and spiritual development and all kinds of things. This is like this basic pattern of reality that can be studied.